So, what happens if you're the difficult person? Find out on this episode of IncreMental Health Tips. Welcome to IncreMental Health Tips. My name is Jared, and as always, I'm joined by my co host Liz. Before we get going today, just a little note that we missed an upload last week, so sorry about that. It's cold and flu season, and it managed to go through our household, but was not COVID. Thank goodness. So, over the past few weeks, we've been talking about dealing with difficult people, and there's a little bit of an elephant in the room with that, and that's if you find yourself constantly, if you find it constantly difficult getting along with other people, sometimes, and we're all guilty of this, so no judgment, but sometimes you're the difficult person. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today is how do you improve yourself and make yourself more of a team player and easier to get along with. So before we get into it and we talk about Liz, some of the strategies that you recommend to your clients, first, I guess I would just pose the question of why. Why should we look to improve ourselves?
Well, when I'm working with clients, I really don't know what the other person in the situation would say. I don't know if they would say this person's difficult or not. So I do have to consider, are there things that my client can do that are going to help them in this situation that they might not have thought of, different skills or things like that that they can do that might resolve the issue without them trying to change the other person.
Right. Well, I just off of that, you can always try and you can always change yourself. You can't change somebody else. And so focusing on where you can actually make progress is one of the things. And as well, you can't expect the world to completely adapt to you. I remember in graduate school, a lot of a really big talking point for a lot of people is toxic work environments. And we've all had toxic work environments, so it's not like they're not a common thing. But there are people I went to school with who would talk about how every job is a toxic culture and how we have to work to change the culture. And I just think that they weren't easy to work with. And I can speak a little bit to that because I had to work with some of these people and we get along just fine and there's no conflict. But sometimes we need to sharpen our own skills and be more of a team player and try our best to not be the difficult person when possible. So Liz, what is some recommended strategies for how we improve ourselves?
Well, I think it's very common for people to get on the defensive anytime that they're given feedback. I've spoken to a lot of people and they'll say, oh, I had this interaction with my boss and my boss said this and it's so unfair, and they go on and on about it. And sometimes it's like, well, if your boss is telling you need to improve in this area, it's possible that they're seeing something that you just don't see. And so that actually needs to be taken into consideration instead of just assuming that your boss is wrong about the feedback that they're giving you. And it doesn't have to be a boss. It could be a friend or anyone else. It's important to actually consider that information, and is there something that you need to do to work on to actually improve yourself and develop some new skills, even if it was something like time management, that you've got to manage your time better in order to do what you need to do.
Well, yeah, so listening to the feedback and not getting personally upset by it is a really good first step. And then obviously, depending on what the feedback is, try and address it. So a good example of this is sometimes there is like, let's take an issue like you miss deadlines.
Mm-hmm.
And so is the issue that you are not managing your time well, or is the issue that you are under resourced? And so complaining if you're under resourced isn't going to get you the resources. So you have to ask the question, okay, how do I get what I need to complete this goal, to accomplish this goal? So there's a certain amount of self-reflection that has to be done, and then you have to try and approach it. But are there any general, Liz, are there any general sort of frameworks that you recommend for how people sort of conduct this reflection process and diagnose these issues?
Well, wherever you are, you're going to be dealing with limited resources. I don't like it's a very rare situation if you're in the position where you can just add more resources or more employees on to address an issue. Most people don't have that option, and so the focus of that is trying to get the best results you can with the resources that you have. But I do think there is a way of evaluating your situation to see what's going on and what are your options within that situation. And I've talked to clients where they have enough awareness to know if I go work somewhere else, I'm still very likely to have these same issues I'm having at work. So I need to figure out a way of dealing with these issues instead of just going to a new workplace where it's not necessarily going to be any better than the current workplace.
Well, there's an old expression. I mean, especially we're framing this a lot in the workplace because I think it's one of the common ways that this manifests. But there's the expression "don't complain empty-handed."
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have, like, if you're going to miss a deadline, have some of the project done, and go and say, "Here's what I was able to do, but here's what I still need." And that's going to be a more compelling argument than if you just didn't do anything because you had this sense that you wouldn't be able to finish it.
Mm-hmm.
So making sure that you're not, try and meet the person halfway to the extent that you can. And I think that at least shows the other person that you're trying, and that might help you find some sort of middle ground with them. But other times it can be, it's not as easy as diagnosing what the problem is. And so perhaps talking to the person who's giving you, who you have the strained relationship with, and listening to what they have to say, you can actually gain a lot of insight and learn from them.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you another non-work related example in terms of how you can evaluate a situation to really pinpoint what the issue is that needs to be worked on. A lot of times with marriage counseling, there's a conflict over, well, the chores aren't getting done. And if you look at an issue like that, that's something that's very likely to happen in any marriage, is that some chores just don't get finished because there's a lot to do, especially with couples who have young kids. So if you switch out your spouse for another one, that's probably not going to resolve that issue. And so it's a good way of doing a test to see, is this the issue or is something else the issue? Is it that we need to develop some skills to actually get a good routine going? So if you can look at the situation and look at, if I were to change, whatever aspect of this, would that resolve the problem? So in the case of someone who's married to an alcoholic, if they were to marry someone who's not an alcoholic, that would resolve the issues of what comes with alcoholism. Now, you can't always do that sort of change, but it's important to keep in mind to look at what is the root cause of the problem, not just a surface level look at it.
Well, and also uh, to make sure that you're not projecting a hypothetical person. Um, like, have realistic standards there, because simply, well, if you were replaced by this fictional schema that I have in my mind of the ideal spouse or friend, uh, so being a little careful of that too can be important.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that it's really helpful for clients is that I can talk them through this and help them think this through. Is this, what is the real issue here and what is the root issue that needs to be changed so that things are functioning well?
All right. Well, as we look to wrap this up, I guess the main aspect, because this is difficult because there's such a wide variety of issues. But the main point is that even if somebody else is being difficult, there's probably plenty that you can do on your end as well. And even if you don't feel that you owe it to this person to do it, you can still work on your own skills and abilities, because ultimately that is developing yourself and can help you with future relationships and future conflict. Liz, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, so I do think there is one more point that sometimes these situations do require setting boundaries, and people can be hesitant to do that. And so getting a good understanding of how and when to set boundaries can be really important in terms of these issues as well.
Well, we'll definitely revisit boundaries on a future episode, but that's where we're going to stop for today. But if you enjoy our content, please consider liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. And until next time, remember that small steps can lead to big changes. We'll see you next time.